Welcome back, everyone. We're going to settle into our sitting time. And tonight, as a practice theme, we're going to be in particular I'm just going to make sure we're going to pause for a moment. It may be that there's some confusion about the link for tonight's Buddhist studies. Great. Thanks, Virginia. That would be great if you can do that and send them this link. Great. So as I was saying, we're going to settle into the sitting time. And a little later in the sit, we'll contemplate the arising of craving and how that might manifest in our practice. Like even the craving to move our body a little bit or whatever it might be. Craving to plan, craving to get rid of something, like some pain in our body. But what makes this contemplation of craving more effective is to take the time to cultivate contentedness, calm and contentedness. When there's some degree of calm and contentment, then the activity of craving just stands out. So it's helpful to sit in a relatively still way. And one way to aim the heart, aim the mind towards peace, the peace of contentment, is just to verbalize it. So like for example, you could just repeat the word contentment or peace each time you feel the breath going out. In the word peace, it means intention to be peaceful with the conditions as they are. And you could use the word ease if you prefer, or the word contentedness, or something like that. Contentment. You can even do the full phrase, peaceful with conditions. Allowing things to be. So you can be somewhat creative, but keep it really simple, and generally it's helpful to be consistent. And in this way, we'll calm the mind's habits of craving, of wanting things to be other than the way they are. Breathing in, let there be the intention to be intimate, to feel what you're feeling. And then breathing out, whether you verbalize it or not, sense this intention to be at ease with the conditions as they are, the conditions of the body and the mind as they are. Peaceful, content, calm, allowing the conditions to be. And we can keep coming back to this meditation on peace, on calm, on contentment, being at ease with the conditions. But in the context of valuing this ease, this contentment, then just notice any craving that might arise. Some attachment to desire. So a desire is there, and that desire feels personal, personally invested in the desire to some degree. The desire to move the body, the desire to think some thought, to solve some problem, to plan something out, to want to fix something, to figure out something. There's all kinds of desires that might arise in this context of being relatively calm and content. And instead of judging the mind for the craving, just see if there's enough space to be interested. Sense, if you can, the seductive nature of the craving. How easy it is to get lost, to run with it. And just the different ways the mind rationalizes the craving, the investment or the engagement with the craving. Generally, when the mind is identified with desire, that the mind gets busy, wanting to do something about the craving. So that can be a telltale sign. And then part of the contemplation of craving during our sitting time is noticing as we observe it without judging and willing to feel whatever tension is arising in conjunction with the craving, tightness in the mind, the heart and body. When we're steady like that, then we might be able to notice the cessation of that particular craving, whether it's because it runs out of steam or the unpleasantness of it becomes obvious and the heart just lets go. But for whatever reason, see if you can sustain that interest until you notice that that particular desire with attachment has ceased. It's no longer moving no longer active in the mind. And notice the mind that's free of that particular craving, no longer there. Be mindful of that absence if you can. We'll just continue now in silence on our own, doing the best we can. Just see what we can learn. Again, without judgment, noticing when the mind is aligned with desire, trying to get something or make something happen or get rid of something. And when the mind is aligned with this intention to be at ease with conditions, to be allowing and peaceful with conditions, content with the way it is. You can be interested in what's in the way of peace or what's in the way of contentment. That can help the mind get interested in this activity of craving, however subtle it might be, wanting things to be different, whatever its particular nature might be now. And one thing we'll often come to understand when we do this kind of contemplation is that although we like the idea of peace and like the idea of contentedness, when we actually observe the mind, it seems that maybe because of habit, the mind's much more interested in the activity of craving than the possibility of peace. Peace with the conditions in that moment. Yeah, take a moment, stretch a little if you'd like, stand even if that's what your body needs. Want to apologize to the people on Zoom. A lot of you were confused about our Zoom link tonight because I put the wrong link in the email that I sent out today. We changed it at the last minute last week and I messed up, so sorry about that. Glad you're here. And just so people know, the link in the public calendar is always going to be the correct one. So if no one's there or you think you're in the wrong place, go to the calendar, find the link there. But hopefully the weekly email that I send to everyone will be accurate going forward. Yeah, tonight we're going to focus in on craving because it's such an important part of this dynamic experience of samsara, that Pali phrase for the cycles of suffering, which is just ordinary existence, and that as someone experiencing ordinary existence, it's never done, it's never quite right, we never lock it in. So it's one of the telltale signs of craving, or a mind, an ignorant mind that is seduced into this habit of craving things to be other than they are, is that restless, busy nature. And it's there so much at the time that peace really stands out as being unusual. Like when the heart is really content, peaceful. And we can even corrupt that. We make that turn that into some busy activity. I have to hold on to this peace. I have to deepen this peace. But peace, real contentment is just the opposite, or I'm sorry, just the absence of that activity of craving. So I want to look at craving because it's part of this chain, this dynamic, mutually dependent activity, samsaric activity, stressful activity that characterizes most of the moments of our lives. But just, and we'll have small groups tonight, and it'll be a chance for, whether you're on Zoom or here in the room, the last 15 to 20 minutes, we'll have small groups. And in your time, people always have permission to pass in these small groups. But the idea is just to share, okay, you've been around for a while, maybe you're 50 years, or maybe you're 25 years old, but you've had some time to observe the nature of your mind and experiencing. And then to use this frame of craving and non-craving, and to have something to say about that. Like, what do you know about craving? What do I know about craving? Like I mentioned in the guided sit, it's such an interesting experience to see that blossoming of craving. Maybe you see an attractive person, or maybe you think about some delicious food you like, and because you're really thinking about it, you even get this, saliva flowing, and the mind's planning, like, where can I get that? What do I need to do? What ingredients do I still need to get? Do I have time? Will people judge me? But if there's enough wisdom and awareness that isn't judging, just letting the mind do what it's inclined to do because of the force of habit or just the momentum of the conditioning in our mind, until there's a natural cessation of that storm, that desire storm, that craving storm. And it's a really interesting moment to recognize, oh yeah, it came to its own resolution. I didn't have to act it out for it to cease. Because that's kind of the lie that's embedded when the seductive movement of craving is happening, that desire. When craving is really desire plus wrong understanding, meaning the mind is presuming or projecting an ownership of the desire. I want this, because we can feel desire as just an impersonal force in the mind and body. And that's really useful. That's a powerful insight, actually, to see that's... Because when we have that insight to see a strong desire, but without the wrong understanding, it starts to build up this confidence that, well, maybe this is true of all desires. Like one place this can happen is when we're sitting and we get cold, for example, and there can be this strong desire, like, I got to stop my sit, get up and get a sweater, or turn the thermostat up, or whatever the mind might think. But because maybe there's some momentum of wisdom and awareness, that's just observed as mental activity being known. That planning, like how I could get some warmth. And it can even, like children do when you try to, or pets do when you try to sort of ignore them. Like my cat wants to go out, then they just try harder, right? So you'll notice that in your mind. It's like, if you don't get a sweater on, I think you're going to die. It starts to get ridiculous, which is actually useful because it builds the confidence that this isn't personal. Because it gets outrageous, and like the mind has no shame. The conditioned mind, it will, because all it knows is to it's, and in a way, the way someone's talked about this, a teacher, is that actually we're more attached to the craving than the object we crave. Like the activity of craving, the busyness of craving. Because it empowers, or it not empowers, but it strengthens the sense of agency of me. How do I know I exist? Because I crave, because I want things to be different or better or worse or whatever. It's that uneasiness of craving that seems to us very familiar, because we recognize it as me. That's who I am. And we don't recognize sort of the more peaceful, empty, and empty, remember, is, because it's a funny word to use in this context, but it's instructive, because the mind is empty of desire with attachment. And whatever desire is there without attachment, that's just that movement in our heart and our mind and our body, It's really so interesting. I've mentioned this in the past, but to especially something that's so wired into both the mind and the body, like sexual sexual attraction, and to have some practice with that, and to not be afraid of it arising and then ceasing, of course, because if it's not fed, it just has its moments, and then because the mind knows better in certain moments at least not to identify with the attraction, it will cease because it's not getting fed with that identification. And to really feel like, oh my gosh, it's like, and there's that sense of how easy it would have been to be swept away without there being wisdom in that moment. It's the same thing like a strong wave of anger, where you really want to throw something at somebody. And often the difference between the people who are incarcerated and ourselves, people who are not incarcerated, at least at this moment, is that when that wave of anger arose, there was some wisdom of restraint, or some wisdom that we can feel these things without having to act them out. We can be really, really angry without having to act out the anger. There's another possibility other than repression, which is simply to know and feel, I'm really angry. This is a desire. I really want to hurt you right now. I really want to get even, or however we might characterize that movement of rage. But if the mind doesn't have that space, then that movement of rage is who I am. And what it suggests, like to pick up the rock or whatever it might be, there's no space to sort of see that as just something being felt or something being known. It just immediately gets integrated into the body-mind. It's just what happens. And we see that sometimes, like when no one's around and we're eating food or something like that, and it's just like the desire to consume the food we like, there's nothing, it just goes right into action. Or, sometimes like when had a really long, hard day and we finally get to our bed and we can, and just the sort of integration of action and desire. Like we're just somebody who wants to get our clothes off and into that bed, our pajamas on and into the bed and into the fetal position, whatever you do. But it's nice now, because we're studying this, to just see that how desire with attachment, with identification, can basically, it's a kind of samadhi, an unskillful samadhi, because the body-mind, the activity of the body and mind can really unify around desire. And that's why it's so seductive, because it really amplifies the sense of self, because it really unifies when we're caught up in desire. We feel whole, even though it's really stressful, we feel whole in a funny way, don't we? When we're just consumed by desire. I mean, political movements use this, like whether it's fear, which is just fear is also craving, right? Craving to get rid of the thing that scares me. The bad guys, the people who are different than us, or whatever it might be. And it really kind of congeals not just us individually, but us collectively too. Politicians learn this because it helps them get elected, to use these forces of congealing. So I think I read part of this last week, but just from the Buddha, this Dhamma that I have attained is profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. But this generation delights in attachment, takes delight in attachment, rejoices in attachment. It is hard for such a generation to see this important thing, namely that conditionality, dependent origination. And it is hard to see these important things, namely the stilling of all fabrications. Right, he's now talking in a very profound way about the cessation of this busyness, which we take as an ordinary me, an ordinary mind, right, the busyness. And so the cessation of fabrications, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. So not just, in terms of the small groups that we have tonight, but really for the rest of our lives, we really want to see ourselves, just like it might make sense to say, oh yeah, I'm a student of suffering and the cessation of suffering, which is, that's the right answer if anyone were to ask you, well, what did the Buddha teach for the 45 years that he was a teacher in northern India 2,600 years ago? You would say suffering and the end of suffering, right? That would be the right answer. And, but it's, in the way the Buddha taught, you could say craving and the cessation of craving, they're one and the same. And we can see this for ourselves. It's like when we're suffering, then it's really just in terms of honing in and supporting the interest of wisdom and awareness. We can ask, what is the heart craving? Like if we're pretty sure, I'm suffering now. Okay, honey, what are you craving? Do you want things to be other than they are? Well, hone in on that. Open to that. Get to know that. What is that craving? And to really see the correlation between a craving, wanting things to be other than they are, and suffering. And that identification with the wanting things to be other than, because wanting the program to be over so you can go to bed or do whatever you're going to do tonight, it isn't really suffering until there's a sense of agency, like I want this program to be over so I can leave. Then this moment's not okay because we've constructed in the mind, it being over. And I have my freedom back to do what I want. And so this is not what I want, right? So the mind, the suffering is constructed. And this is, we can understand it intellectually, but the experience is very radical when we see the constructed nature of suffering. That's why we said a while ago, it's really useful to, when you're not overwhelmed and you're not being seduced, but to just keep tracking the desire until it's just not there. To really see, because it reinforces that however real it appears, however seductive, however easy it would be for me to identify, get attached. We're building this wisdom that understands it's not what it appears to be. The strong desire is not personal. It's there in the body and the mind, however it's gotten triggered. But just because it's there doesn't make it personal. That's the habit. That's the extra piece that the ignorance and habit energies applies to the moment. And then another thing that you might share in the small group that might seem relevant is just the congealing nature, like that when we get identified with desire, then so there's a sense of a me here that wants something or wants to get rid of something, and then what we might call intentional action, so karma. I do something about that desire that I'm attached to. I might just think about it, I might say something about it, and I might actually do something with my body about it, right? So that whole process from a desire with identification with attachment to it starts to congeal, the mind gets fixated on it, and it starts to act on it. And it becomes the one who acted on it. So these are three really important steps from craving to clinging to becoming. You'll see this in dependent origination, right? And it's just the congealing, it's just the karmic effects. It's the natural unfolding. Like when there's desire with attachment, there will be activity arising out of that desire with attachment. And then there will be the identity. I did that. I thought that. I planned that. I said that. I did that with my body. I took that thing, or I threw that rock, or I whatever. And not just negative activities. We might desire, and we might be attached to the desire to save the world. But that's the becoming energy. Soon as the mind is identified with being the one who did that, then, in the Buddhist sense of things, we've created an entanglement that's it sets the mind up because it's not actually that way. So there will be frustration, there will be betrayal. As it's said in some of the teachings on dependent origination, what arises is the whole mass of suffering, or sometimes it's put into birth, aging, and death, right? But it's just this, once the mind has gotten established as the one who did this, the one who is this, because whatever we are, we can't be that. So it will be a disappointment. Like however the mind establishes itself isn't in alignment with reality, because reality is very fluid. It isn't fixed in any way. So whenever the mind fixes itself as somebody who did something, it's a kind of abomination because it's not in alignment with the way it is. And all the tension, the busyness that the mind is involved with trying to keep patching up, it's delusion. It's understanding that's not in alignment with things. So this may be something you share, just like whatever it might be, some fixation, some desire that then becomes some fixation. Where we talk about this, another place in the Buddhist teachings is in terms of these inevitable distortions where we see things as being permanent when they're really impermanent, or we see things as being beautiful when they're neither beautiful nor ugly, they're just what they are, or we see things in terms of being personal when they're not personal. And it starts with just a perception, but then we think about the perception, so a wrong perception, we misperceive something. And we've all had examples of this, where we think our partner left something in the sink, and they should have washed it. when it was our dish, but somehow we just got it wrong and we misperceived. But then we think about it like, yeah, they're always leaving dishes and not washing them, right? And that, it's like builds up cognitive dissonance. It's, and then it becomes my view, like a fixed view, that my partner is the one who doesn't do their dishes, right? But it was based on a misperception and then wrong thinking, be out of that misperception, and then a wrong belief, a wrong view, fixed view, based on the wrong perception and wrong thinking in the wrong way, thinking in a way that wasn't in alignment with what actually happened. So this solidification is really good to see, and it's like a beautiful testimonial in these Dharma groups to say, like how ignorance works, how it's congealing. It sets us up for suffering. And it loosens the screws to say it out loud. But in a way, it's humiliating. But in this context, in this community, it shouldn't be humiliating. It should be liberating to kind of share the ways that we've gotten deluded and caught in our delusion and acted on our delusion and defended our delusion. Because to talk about it means there's some space, some freedom from that, and probably some learning and some appropriate respect and care now about not doing it, as often or as getting caught as deeply as we have before. It's just like another example of that is if you're somebody who falls hard in love, when you meet another person, thinking wrongly that this person is going to make me happy. And, and just that kind of whole world that actually ends up separating ourselves from the person, which means the relationship's not going to work because we're so in our idea that I found the right person, And we've got it all planned out, like how this person is going to be great for me. And we're not actually interacting in that kind of fresh and scary way with this other being. That's just a natural dynamic unfolding, not really showing up. So it's not so satisfying for them. And so they say, see you later. And then there's this huge betrayal. Like, my God, how did that happen? How did I not see that? What was I missing? Same thing like with religious or spiritual teachers too. We can imagine the Dalai Lama or whoever it might be, Shelley Graf. And it's convenient for our mind to kind of either think they're the worst or they're the best, depending on our conditioning, because some of us, are just, as soon as someone is inspired by somebody, we're already looking for all their faults, like, oh, they're probably just out to manipulate and get, But regardless of the way we are, it's like just that congealing from the desire to be right or the desire to know, and then acting on it, like talking to other people, hey, do you know about Shelley? And trying, how we see this in ourselves and in others. It's like they're in the congealing process and they need another person, they need to do something about their craving, so they want to talk to us about it, or we want to talk to them about it, because that's how we try to create ground in a groundless realm. We're in a groundless realm. We're in a fluid realm, human realm, right? There's nothing fixed. But craving always has that fixed nature. So there's craving, clinging, becoming, the whole mass of suffering, and that's sort of entrenches ignorance in the mind. Isn't that true? Like often when we get betrayed, when we get set up by life, and get attached in some way, and then experience the inevitable frustration and betrayal, and once we're done crying or whatever, what do? we get involved in another craving project. I'm going to finally get my act together. I'm going to find a Buddhist meditation center. Even that, right? I'm going to find a Buddhist meditation center and I'm going to become enlightened. That can be the next craving project. And then we congeal around it. We think about it. We start to act, we get our mala beads or whatever. Here we don't have so many, a set costume. But there are different ways, even in the insight meditation community to kind of play the role. And it can become a fixation, And then if we don't make any progress, like we're still stressed, or we don't get calm, or we don't see things more deeply, or we still do stupid stuff, we can then feel totally betrayed by it. And then we'll find another thing, a self-help book, or another kind of church or synagogue, or whatever it might be, and we do the same thing all over again in a different context. Because we haven't really seen that the problem is we're looking for solid ground. And that's why craving is so seductive, because it's really that congealing process of taking a hold or identifying with the activity of desire, infusing a sense of self, of agency in the desire, acting on it, becoming the one who's acting on it. And then, because we're not in control, and because things are so fluid and uncertain, there's going to be, at some point, we sometimes get a pretty good ride before disappointment settles in. I say this sometimes because it's why we have, cosmology or stories. That in Buddhist cosmology, there are these angelic or deva realms. And one of the interesting things that makes this point is that in a deva realm, like you've got a body of light, and you make love by just looking at your lover, look at their eyes. You don't have the coarse body, you don't have, anything that's rough or dense. And ambrosia is just whatever, love or but and it's said, it's just a powerful story that as soon as you're born into one of those realms, you're immediately in the sort of full bloom of your youth, like a 17-year-old or something like that. And you stay in that way, with a body of light, nothing coarse, of course. You're in an angelic, celestial realm. And you're there for inconceivable length of time. And then when you die, it's very quick. You go from, bloom of youth, everything light and beautiful, to it all passing away very quickly. There's no aging process. It just happens very quickly. So you can imagine the sense of betrayal. Because the shadow of being in one of those realms, evidently, at least as the stories go, is that you appropriately think this is going to last forever. Which is what we think here, we have less of a reason, because there's so much evidence that things are impermanent, and that there is aging, and that there is uncertainty, and things do happen to people all the time around us. But still, we don't think it's going to happen to us until it does. Loss doesn't happen. We do, how often as we're moving through the day are we understanding that anything can happen anytime? Both good and bad, not just bad. That whatever this is, it's uncertain. And we know for sure that it won't stay the same, whatever this is for each of us. So, because of this wrong understanding, a lot of it unconscious, we're just looking for solid ground. And that's that craving, grasping, becoming. And the consequence just leads to more of the same. So even when we do get sort of totally burnt out or totally betrayed, we end up wanting to do the same thing. I tell this story sometimes about freshman year in college, and I had so much energy in those years, as a lot of young people do, and I just so wanted to do everything, wanted to be loved and wanting to have a partner and wanting to be great in my classes and a good athlete and all this sort of stuff. And I just, and for whatever reason, the flight home from New Jersey, where I went to college, was later than a lot of the other people in my class and friends. And so I had some hours just sort of hanging out on campus before I got to the airport. And so, because I didn't have anybody to interact with, and I was probably exhausted from exams and stuff, I remember just sort of wandering around like, what just happened? Just feeling that sense, and it gave me a window on like how much craving was dominating my mind and my life. And I really had some clarity, and I processed it. I had to work really hard in the summers to earn as much money as possible. I had like 3 jobs. But what really occupied my mind was like, I got to figure out what to do about this. And by the end of the summer, I've been really reflecting deeply about this. The only thing I could think of is to do what I did before, but better. Crave better in a funny way. I didn't see an alternative because it hadn't been pointed out to me. And I had enough wisdom to know, like, well, want something different, but it's still wanting. I had no alternative but to try to get what I wanted. That was like the only thing that made sense. And then, of course, like I sort of joked about, that's what brings us to common ground. We want something. But hopefully, here now wanting relief, wanting peace, wanting the stress to go away. And then the important thing is that we hear the teachings that are like out there. Like that section that I read earlier, the stilling of all fabrications, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. So it's really, a more specific way about talking about letting go. That's actually, in terms of ultimate meditation objects, like what do we keep in mind? We're learning how to keep letting go in mind, non-attachment in mind, or non-identification in mind. So whatever we do with our duties and responsibilities in the world, the flavor of non-attachment is what we keep in mind. So like giving a talk in front of a group of people, right? And so if attachment were to arise, it would stand out because I'd been keeping non-attachment in mind. And so as soon as attachment creeps in from this angle or that angle, and the mind starting to take things personally and get attached, then it stands out as heavy and unnecessary, And in seeing its unnecessary nature, its dysfunctional nature, letting go, it's like that. It will start over again. Like, oh yeah, letting go, not identifying, not holding, not taking it personally. But if we don't know that, then we can't keep letting go in mind. It's kind of it generally for most people, it builds gradually that confidence, the insight and the confidence in the insight in letting go. I mean, we all kind of know what it means or what it points to. But the insight, this heart is free of grasping, or this heart is free of craving. To really see that clearly, to really know the mind, the heart, absent, empty of craving, changes our lives in a profound way. And where we find that is right here. We don't have to kind of get to a special place. We find it in our normal realm of craving, of having an ordinary mind who wants this and wants to get rid of that. But we're observing that with interest, with that stability of wisdom and awareness. Because craving, like everything else, arises and ceases. So we can find, discover, or realize those moments of non-craving simply by stabilizing present moment awareness in our current situation where we have a lot of craving and being identified with desire. Because it ceases all the time. And there's a little moment of its cessation before we jump onto the next craving. And we can get interested in that moment. We just haven't learned to trust it and haven't learned to sense its relevance. And sometimes we call this a coolness, this cessation of craving. I'll just end before we break into small groups. I'm going to read this very well-known passage from the Buddhist teachings. In Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, he calls it one fortunate attachment, which is sort of controversial for the Buddha's talk to be called one fortunate attachment. Other people translate it as an auspicious day. This is Gil Fronsdal's translation. The Buddha said, "Don't chase the past or long for the future. The past is left behind. The future is not yet reached. Right where it is, have insight into whatever phenomena is present. Not faltering and not agitated. By knowing it, one develops the heart. Ardently do what should be done today. Who knows? Death may come tomorrow. There's no bargaining with mortality and its great army. Who dwells thus ardent, active day and night is, says the peaceful sage, one who has an auspicious day." And Gil writes about this passage. If you don't know, Gil Fronsdal is a teacher in this lineage here, early Buddhism or insight meditation. He has a wonderful center out in the South Bay, south of San Francisco. And he's a scholar besides being a Dharma teacher. Anyway, he writes about this passage, "The poem contains no ideology, sectarian beliefs, or references to the divine or supernatural realities. Instead, it emphasizes attaining insight into the immediacy of one's present experience, an activity that gives one an auspicious day." So again, in the small groups, which we do every other week, so tonight and then week 4, just sharing, and we do a go-round. Everybody gets 2 or 3 minutes just to speak, and then usually 5 to 10 minutes for discussion. And when the one person's speaking, it's just a sacred time for the others just to listen and receive what they have to say, including if they pass. Let there be some silence, and then move on to the next person. And then the person who passes, you may want, after other people have gone, you might think of something you do want to share. And it could be anything related to the study that you've done or practice that you've done this last week. But in particular, to reflect on craving and your experience of the cessation of craving. And not to be ashamed about sharing your own entanglement with craving, and especially that congealing process where whatever it was initially just a desire with some attachment, and then upon acting on it, like what got set in motion for you, and did it actually as the Buddha suggests? And you don't want to believe this, you want to check it out. Does craving lead to dukkha? Is craving dukkha? Like when there's craving, with the arising of craving, there's the arising of dukkha. If craving doesn't arise, dukkha doesn't arise. Now that's that conditionality. When there's craving, there's dukkha. With the arising of craving, there's the arising of dukkha. When there's no craving, there's no dukkha. If craving doesn't arise, dukkha doesn't arise. Right? That's the formula from the Buddha. Now the question is that true for us? And what can you share in the small group around that? And then Maggie's here, and she'll divide up the people on Zoom into groups of 3 or so. And then we'll let you know when 9 o'clock Central Time rolls around, so you can say goodnight to your small group folks and head out. We won't come back here in the building as a big group, and people on Zoom won't come back into the large group either. You'll just end your small group. And Maggie will give you like a 2-minute warning to let you know to wrap up, and we'll end right around 9 o'clock. Before we end, I just want to mention we have a guest teacher coming. Nakaway will be here, a good friend and colleague of Shelley, one of the group of 20 or so people that went through the teacher training it ended about maybe 3 years ago. And they'll be giving a public talk on Friday night, both on Zoom and in person, doing the day long with Shelley on Saturday, and then teaching the Sunday night weekly practice group instead of Shelley. So join in for that. It's really fortunate that we can bring in some guest teachers during the year. Good. So why don't we go ahead, Maggie, and set the Zoom people up, and I'll mute myself so I don't interrupt.